Now back to my presentation. So you can see that the CSS rule name paragraph style, you write it in between your style, opening and closing style. Note that the bold, italics and font size properties to any paragraph within the web page which is assigned paragraph style. So they will get that property. And note that each property is separated by semicolon. You can see the semicolon here. Font size 24 points, semicolon. Font weight, bold, semicolon, and like that. Okay. Now let's talk about CSS syntax to get a better understanding of CSS. A cascading style sheet rule tells the browser what the HTML looks like. What it looks like. Now, and what it should do. A rule can dictate what just on HTML tag should look like, or you can construct your own rule to be applied anywhere you want it. For example, that paragraph I display is my own rule, and I apply it. For example, a rule can be set up to tell the browser to format every paragraph so that its first line is indented. Or you could construct your own paragraph rule and apply style to certain paragraphs, not all paragraphs. So it's possible that you can use another class name to another paragraph and begin to apply your CSS rule to it. There are three parts to a CSS rule. Now, a rule is the syntax of the CSS. Just like when you want to speak English language has its own rule, like verb, noun, pronoun, how you structure them to construct a sentence. So the same thing applies in CSS. In CSS, you first of all declare the selector H1. For example, I have the selector called H1. If you check out my paragraph style, I first of all write paragraph style. That is the selector. So in that case, that is the selector. So that's the first thing you do. You declare the selector, then you open this curly brace. This curly brace, some people call it bracket, it's not bracket, it's a curly brace. Then you type the property. After the property, you put colon. Then you type the value of the property, then you close it with semicolon. So that is the end of a property. If you want to apply more property to this H1 selector, you begin another property, put a space, font size, another property, the colon, then the value of the property, then you close it with semicolon. So that is how to declare CSS. So there are three parts. We have the selector, we have the property, then we have the value. I'm going to take each of these parts one by one. Now let's look at the selector. There are three types of CSS selector. We have number one, HTML selector, a class selector, and an ID selector. Now, an HTML selector is the text part of an HTML tag. So when you are styling any HTML element, that is HTML selector. So for example, look at the paragraph tag P. A selector will just be ordinary P. In other words, you remove the angle bracket, then you get the HTML selector. But in case of style selector, you can use it anywhere on your page. The paragraph style that I use above is a type of class selector. So you decide the name of the class selector by yourself, then you apply the style to some text on the page. ID selector is similar to class selector, but you use them to identify a particular element. It cannot be applied to other similar elements on the same page. Now, before I continue, let me quickly show you demonstration about selector. Now look at this. I have a paragraph tag and I apply class attribute to it. If I want to apply CSS to this, I'm going to use class selector. So the name of the class is paragraph style, and I started with dot paragraph style. Now let's say this particular one, I didn't use any attribute. I just remove the attribute, I leave it as paragraph, and I save. If I go back to my browser and I refresh, you see that it has removed the CSS for this. This is another issue of CSS. It retains this. Why? Because this class is applied to paragraph style. So any HTML bearing that class, we get that property. But the other one, this paragraph, I didn't put any style. But if I start another CSS rule here, if I start another CSS rule and I type P, then I begin to apply some, let me just copy this. Okay, let me copy it to this. And I put it here, Ctrl V. Don't forget the close curly brace. I put the close curly brace there. Now, in order to differentiate it this time, let me put 48 point. Let's change our color here. EE. Font weight. Let it be bold too. Now, what am I doing here? I'm writing, I declare style tag in my head section. No. If you want to write CSS, you can put it within the head section. Just start the style tag, then we have the closing style tag. Now, in this case, I have paragraph style. I started with dots. So any class selector will start with dots. But HTML selector will start with ordinary, the name of the HTML. So what is the difference here? This P will apply to any paragraph on my page. But this particular paragraph is having a class. So this P will not work. It is this class that we apply to this. If I save this and I refresh, now you can see this is the list of programs we offer on our site. This is another issue of CSS. Okay, something is wrong there. Okay, nothing is wrong. It is simply applying the font size 48, color this, font width bold. Is applying to all paragraph located on my site. Like this paragraph, it can't apply to this paragraph because I've applied a class to it. That's what I'm trying to show you. This kind of the CSS here will be class selector. We use class selector. But the HTML, like this is my first website. This HTML selector with ordinary P is going to affect this paragraph. Then it's going to affect this paragraph. This is another issue of CSS. It's going to affect it. It's going to affect, this is the list of programs we offer on our site. So anywhere it says ordinary paragraph, it will affect it. But since it is HTML selector, you just type the name of the selector. For example, if I put another one here, let me put another body. Let me put body, for example, and I say background color, and I put hash 77EFF, and I close it with curly brace. Now look at this. Body is HTML tag. P is HTML tags. Anytime you are writing CSS for HTML tag, it means you are using HTML selector. I believe you get the point. So if I save this and I go back to my web page and I refresh, so you can see that my page is having a background color because I've said let the body of my page, let it have a background color. So that is the difference between class and HTML selector. But what of this ID selector? This ID selector. In case of ID selector, ID selector is similar to class selector, but you use them to identify a particular element. It cannot be applied to other similar elements on the page, except the element to which it is assigned. Now, this is what we are saying. Now, if I go back to my distance, my index, now if I change this to ID, then if I change it to ID and I save, then I have to change this paragraph style to hash. So you start ID with hash sign, not dot. So if I save this and I go back to my browser and refresh, the same thing will happen. Alright. But let's create a class instead of ID now. Let me put another paragraph here. Ctrl C. Let me just copy this paragraph, Ctrl V. Let me just say this is a display. This is a display of selectors. So instead of ID, and I have a class, I can give them the same name. I can just say cool. Alright, let me save this. If I want to give this one a CSS, I will have to type the CSS separate. I will start with cool. Because I'm using class, that's why I start with dot. If I'm using ID, I will start with hash. So I'm going to give it property. I'll just say color. The color, if I say hash FF00000. Okay, let's give it that color and save. Let's save. What have I just done? I have a paragraph with ID selector. I have another paragraph with class selector. And I'm going to show you that when you use ID, you precede it with hash. When you use class, you precede it with color in your CSS. I mean with a dot in your CSS. So you can see the difference between ID and class. So if I save this, I go back to my browser and I refresh. Okay. Now, this is a cool display of CSS. That one is the paragraph style. You can see that is a font 24. But that of a cool, this is a display of selector. And I select the color be FF00, but it is also giving it font size that is big. Because we have said let all paragraph be big, but this particular paragraph is having a class called cool. So the HTML selector will apply all this to all your paragraph, but any paragraph with a particular class is going to add additional property to it, apply to that class. So I hope you get this point. In the next video, I'm going to elaborate on this and explain more on CSS selector. So in summary, there are three kinds of CSS selector. We have HTML, class selector, ID selector. I will continue from here in the next video. I want to thank you for listening, and I hope you get the point. And I'm going to attach this exercise file on our portal, I mean to our course page on our portal, and this presentation too will also be attached, will also be uploaded on the portal. Once again, thank you for listening.